This topic is on the challenge of universality and focus, a Yoga-Vedanta perspective. I just want to share with you some of our ideas and hopefully go deeper into this discussion about interspirituality, no tradition, and multiple religious traditions that we're hearing. In the Vedanta tradition, we believe that truth is universal. And in the Rig Veda, the oldest Veda of the Vedanta tradition, there is a saying, Ekam Sad Vipa Bahuda Vedanti. Truth is one. Sages call it by various names. Sri Ramakrishna lived from 1836 to 1886, and he revitalized this truth. He practiced the various conflicting sects within Hinduism, and then he went on to practice Islam. He had the vision of Christ. He understood the subtle insights of Buddhism, and he proclaimed with authority, as many people, so many paths. So there is universality within every major faith tradition of the world. But what is it? I feel it's spiritual practice that leads to union with God. And this comes from Ramakrishna. This is not my wisdom. And this God, it could be called Brahman, Yahweh, Allah, Buddha nature. Vivekananda, Sri Ramakrishna's foremost disciple, said that is the one universal religion, spirituality, and spirituality alone. Over and above the traditions that he practiced, Ramakrishna experienced firsthand non-dualism, the experience of Advaita, not two, literally translates as not two, the experience of the unity of existence, that center at which all of the radii of the various faith traditions meet. And what's so interesting and makes us go further, I feel, is Swami Vivekananda, in one sentence, he said, unless there is unity at the universal heart, we cannot understand variety. So we need to look beyond the external forms in which the truths are clad, the scriptures, the rituals, the mythologies, to what Vivekananda called the internal soul of every religion. And these may appear contradictory, but actually they're supplementary. That each religious tradition, each religion, takes up one angle or aspect of the universal truth and devotes itself to embodying and typifying that part of the great truth. So you know, one religion can completely encompass it. Hence, all of our religious traditions, all of our paths, can only add but never subtract to this one universal truth. As we progress from truth to truth, from lower truth to higher truth, in that way. In fact, Vivekananda said, the second point about this understanding variety only from the universal heart, would to God there be 20 million more such faith traditions, for the more there are, the greater the field for selection. And the more I'm in interspiritual dialogue, the more I realize how important that would be. He stressed that we cannot fit every aspirant into any one religion, but each must have their own individual religion, individual as far as externals go. He also said something very shocking. It's good to be born in a church, but bad to die there. Meaning that the sapling needs to be fenced to grow, to gain its strength, and then when it grows to a certain point, the hedge, the fence, has to be removed so it can grow into a tree. So I think surely Vivekananda would have commended the spirit behind the spiritual but not religious movement that we see today, and today's hyphenated religious traditions that have sprung up, the Jewish Buddhist, or the Christian Sufis, or the Christian, Jewish, or Muslim Vedantins. We also have a hyphenated tradition for many in this country. But he would have added a cautionary note. and I feel so also would Sri Ramakrishna. So I'd like to share with you some of those cautionary commentaries. Spirituality is at the core of universality. But what are the nuts and bolts of spirituality? What are the nuts and bolts of spirituality? It's what we do every day. And to build on that, most teachers of all tradition stress two secrets of success in that spirituality, and that is regularity and one-pointedness of practice. The great Maharishi, the great Rishi Patanjali, thousands of years ago, more than 2,000 years ago, explained in the first chapter of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, verse 32, to counteract obstacles to yoga, one should take up the practice of one principle. So when the day begins and ends with some practice, the idea of that, and it took me a long time to understand this. Why regularity? Especially when I was a young nun. Why do I have to be regular to the shrine? Why do I have to do this? Why do I have to do that? But I found that as I entered deeper into the practice, to try to follow what my teacher was telling me to do, that any one practice that we have, whether it be prayer, meditation, worship, sets a spiritual current for the day. It sets it in motion. And it flows throughout the day. And at the end of the day, there's something that happens, like it bookends it, so that we feel we are moving in that stream, and that current, we're nourished by it. And it informs the events of our day. We can feel it around us. And it feeds into our next day's meditation. It makes it easier for us to progress in meditation when we have that current of regularity of practice. One of our very old swamis, in fact, confided in me. He said, travel interrupts that flow because it breaks the rhythm. But still he traveled. But that's the kind of current that arises with regularity of spiritual practice. And this is called nishta, Sanskrit word meaning one-pointedness. So without that nishta, without that momentum for union, it's not possible to have that self-realization that we long for. Now, some aspirants are inspired by Ramakrishna's example, and his example is really awesome. And they want to follow all or several paths at once, and they feel, some of our swamis and some of our nuns who have come into the Vedanta, they've been on multiple paths. And we think, why restrict myself to one path? I want to be universal. Well, we know that there are several different approaches to that. One is syncretism. Take what we like from different traditions and try to synthesize with our own path and perform a collection of practices, some Hindu, some Buddhist, some Christian, some Sufi. Well, most teachers of all traditions would say, be careful what you do, and this is why. They would not necessarily say, don't do this, but these are the dangers. First of all, Sri Ramakrishna had a unique capacity. Few luminaries in the history of the world religions could live for 6 months in Nirvikalpa Samadhi and survive that. It's unheard of. I've not heard of this in any other luminary in the world's living religious traditions. Those rare individuals, and I mean rare, I've often heard people come to me and say, I've had the non-dual experience. Well, there are many non-dual types of experience, but there is one samadhi called nirvikalpa, which very few people attain. And when they do, it absolutely shatters all ego. One of our swamis we all heard from Ramakrishna that such a person who lived in nirvikalpa, a so-called normal human being, would only live for 21 days. Well, one such sadhu from outside of our tradition was brought to one of our hospitals in Kankal. And this Swami said, we're going to keep this sadhu alive. And they fed him, they massaged him, they moved him, but at the end of 21 days, the body fell. And so this is the kind of experience we're talking about. Second of all, when Ramakrishna took up any path, he put all other practices aside. And this was something that was explained to me recently by one of our senior swamis. When he took up Islam, he no longer entered the Hindu temples. He stopped Hindu meditation practices altogether. He ate only Muslim-style food, and he dressed as a Muslim. And in those days, that was unheard of. For most of us, it takes years to really attain some depth in a single tradition. And this is true. This is what our revered swamis would tell us. This is what those of us who have been practicing for 40, 50 years have found, that really there are depths and depths and depths. And it takes one pointed practice to begin to realize how little we know about our tradition. Third, now this is very interesting to me because I'm drawn to certain segments in other traditions, and I have informed my own tradition by some practices or adjusting some of my practices. This is interesting because the danger of undertaking a practice from a different tradition is the practice itself may be rooted in the spiritual premise that is completely incompatible with ours. Let me give you an example. I'm drawn to the Theravada Buddhist practice of mindfulness, watching the breath with the object of seeing the impermanence in everything. Even in consciousness and the experience of the self is what the practice is. Now, the Theravadan and the Vedantan look the same on the outside, but they have completely different understandings of consciousness and self. To the Theravadan, consciousness is not pure underlying consciousness. That consciousness that we experience in Vedanta, it's just moments of conscious activity. And to the Theravadan, self is not permanent, as in Vedantan. It is only the false appearance of a permanent self. Even this idea of a permanent self is false, negated, which in the mindfulness practice, the Buddhist tries to overcome. So with these Vipassana retreats, often our practitioners say, I was asked to give up my mantra practice, to give up any meditation on a form, and to use this practice. So that is the danger. For us, the self, the higher self, is the Atman, and it is all that is. It's one with Brahman, and that self can never be denied in any state of consciousness. However, mindfulness practice can be practiced by Vedantins if we know what we're doing. Swami Atmarupananda, a senior monk of our order, stated it very beautifully. He had practiced a little bit in the Buddhist tradition. He was an authority on Buddhism. And he says, whereas Buddhists practice mindfulness to see through the illusion of selfhood, including the idea of enduring consciousness, a Vedantin would practice it in order to see that, yes, everything is momentary except the observing consciousness, which is the self, the unseen seer. Now, in our tradition, I'm going to share with you something very, very personal. There's even a danger of injuring our spiritual life when we undertake practices from different lineages or different paths within our tradition, our own tradition. And let me share you a story that happened during Ramakrishna's lifetime with the direct disciples. The idea is that there are different levels to non-dualism: dualism, qualified non-dualism, and non-dualism. And if we jump too rapidly to the rooftop, we can fall. We simply haven't had the proper preparation, the systematic practice to allow and assimilate that experience. Now, during Ramakrishna's life, Naran, the future Vivekananda, felt a growing spiritual power within himself, and he decided to test it on a brother monk, Swami Abhedananda. They sat together in meditation, and Naran touched Abhedananda, and an electric current was transmitted to Abhedananda, and he entered into a very deep meditation. Ramakrishna was in his room upstairs. He was bedridden, but he understood what had happened. He called Naran to him, and he said, "What harm you have done by infusing your non-dual ideas into him. He's been following the devotional path for a long time, and now it's all spoiled, like a miscarriage in the 6th month of pregnancy." Ramakrishna then worked carefully for the rest of his life to correct the ill-digested non-dual experience that monk had had. And fourthly, lastly, spiritual practice from any faith tradition comes from a mythic universe. And it's taken me a long time to dawn what I would consider a holistic mythic universe of the Hindu tradition, an integrated context of that tradition, based on the revelations and visions from which the foundational beliefs, values, practices, images, ways of interpreting mind, self, world, ultimate reality flow. And this provides the aspirant with a mythic mind that over time becomes assimilated, stable, well integrated within that tradition, because it is deeply considered, examined, and held up to the light of truth, not just donned for a short time, then discarded or inherited and blindly accepted. And so from the spiritual integrity of this context, I feel that we can engage in a very fruitful interspiritual dialogue that further informs and nourishes our own traditions by sharing in the mythic worlds of other traditions, studying how they have dealt on the deepest level with similar questions as to the nature of mind, self, world, ultimate reality, that we can take dialogue to a very, very deep level, an experiential level, in order to see truth from different perspectives. And that gives us a lens with which we can experience that ultimate with depth of vision. I thank you very much.
My question is, how important are the cultural influences in each particular tradition? In other words, you're wearing the saffron robes, which was brought to the United States context from an overseas situation, and still within this country is considered exotic, or,
Not really. You're not from California.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, these are not saris, you'll notice. They've been adapted to the West, and they are a reminder of the witness, and a reminder of a rebirth that radically transforms one's perspective. So it's a reminder.
But even in the keeping of a language that is not normally spoken, or...
Not all of our monks and nuns know Sanskrit. No. I think Vedanta is adapted very beautifully to the West. It has Protestant style. We meet, our centers meet at 11 on Sundays. That's a tradition in this country for worship and for lectures, Sunday sermons, and so forth. So we have adapted to each of our cultures, South America, the United States, and so on. Any other questions? Yes.
I guess I'm just curious. So I really appreciated what you said, and I appreciated the way you said it. That here are the cautions, here are the dangers, and so I guess what I'm curious about is, it's clear from your talk what would be missing. You know, that you would miss a regularity, a one-pointedness that would create some kind of depth in your practice.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Because we do have we have Jewish rabbis, we have Catholic sisters who have been initiated, We have Christians, Jews, in fact Muslims. We have Muslim swamis who look on Ramakrishna as Allah, or you know, who accept the tenets of Vedanta. See? So it depends. If the spiritual premise is not antithetical to yours, you know, for example, if you take a Buddhist practice that believes in illusion and you believe in Christ, where does that put Christ? As the creator, you know, as a divine incarnation.
Well, I mean, I think you kind of ended up answering it. You showed us what the background is, and I'm curious what the foreground is, and if you can compare like the foreground and background of each. And so I think you did speak on that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you.